You made me
I
paranoid.
know,
That's why I ran to the bathroom.
All we're going to be doing all night is just...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. McNally Robinson Booksellers and the Prairie Ink Restaurant are now closed for the evening. We'll begin by locking the north doors. That's the north facing 8th Street. We'll lock those immediately. Please exit the store through the west doors into the mall parking lot. I'd like to thank you for visiting. Our store and restaurant will reopen tomorrow at 10 a.m. Have a good night. Don't freeze.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Music Talk from McNally Robinson. We're here in the Travel Alcove. I'm Mark, and my guest this week is Janna Saylor. Hello, Janna.
Hey, Mark. How's
Welcome
it going?
back to Saskatoon.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm sorry it's the coldest week of the year.
Well, I think on the day that I landed, when it was something like minus 47, wasn't it like warmer on like the moon or something?
Yeah. Yeah. But you grew up here. You know that. It's
character
standard. Par
building.
for the course
Yeah,
when you're in
that's right.
Saskatchewan. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight on the live stream, both on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. You can actually ask us questions in the live chat that's taking place. We've got Megan from the SSO, who's behind the camera over there, who is actually sending us your questions right here so we can answer them at the end of the show. So please send them in, chat, get involved. We'd love to hear from you. I'm really grateful. Way back in the fall, well, I guess in the spring, you were announced as part of our 90th season. This was the weekend you were supposed to be here. We had a very cool program in place. And then, the world changed. And so in the spring, we sort of just said, well, let's wait and see. And then in the summer, it was, well, let's wait and see. I'm so grateful in the fall when I reached out and said, we're doing travel. Let's go somewhere warm. That actually, and I remember saying to you, I want to do warm because it's going to be cold, and I feel like I brought this on.
Yeah, it's all your fault,
It's all
actually.
my fault. Yeah, I know. It was like, but it's like it's usually a pretty good risk to assume that January is going to be. You were with us a few years ago, and it's a great thrill to have you back. What have you been up to in the last couple years? You're now in Calgary.
I am, yeah. So I recently relocated to be with my spouse in Calgary, he's one of the concertmasters with the Calgary Phil, so he's rather entrenched there, and I'm a little bit more mobile, so I can dash back and forth between my my ensembles in Vancouver and then guest conduct basically from anywhere with with an airport. So yeah, that's been a big life change for sure, but it's also opened up some more opportunities. I'm doing some work with the Calgary Phil there. And also teaching at Mount Royal University as of this past year. That kind of was an unexpected bonus that kind of came in right when all of my conducting contracts were disappearing. So that was great timing.
Yeah, perfect timing.
In more ways than one. And so, while continuing to grow the Allegra Chamber Orchestra, recently we released a CD with a Vancouver Intercultural Orchestra. I've been with them for almost 10 years now. I'm old enough to be to be doing things for 10 years now, which is a little bit strange. Yeah. But I first started out with them as a violinist, and still do a little bit of chamber things with them. But we just released a CD called "In the Key of the World," and the Intercultural Orchestra is a fascinating project. It's half European, Western orchestra. That we're used to seeing, and then half world instruments, mainly comprised of Iranian, Chinese, Hindustani instruments. So it's a really fascinating project that I think is really important, not only for music but for the world, to see those beautiful collaborations.
Yeah, it's funny. We've started a Musico project here in Saskatoon, which is bringing together world musicians who are here in Saskatoon. It's been fascinating to network with them and learn about the notation for pipa, which
Absolutely.
was something I didn't know about, and have people show us the tabla and all these instruments. And so they're actually going to be doing a performance in the summer. Hopefully we can do outdoor performances in the summer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such a unique time in history that we actually get to put all these instruments together in a room.
Absolutely. And I always learn so much from those musicians and from those traditions, the Chinese tradition in particular. so incredibly rich and diverse, like hundreds of instruments. I think every time we put on a new program, I learn about a new instrument from the Chinese tradition, and that goes back so far. And there's so much folklore that's surrounding those instruments. They go back to the dynastic eras, and also stretching your ears. And one of the big challenges we had with putting that group together in the very beginning is we all read different kinds of music.
Yeah.
And so, as long as it was going all right, it was fine. But when we had to stop and fix something, we usually just ended up having to go back to the beginning because we weren't all speaking the same.
Notation between instruments is and there's no way to line it up magically.
Exactly.
So that's one of those fascinating challenges of 21st century classical music meeting actual original classical music,
Exactly.
which in many cultures is much older than the Western tradition.
It's absolutely
Centuries and
predates. Predates our Western, our so-called Western tradition. Yeah, by hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years. Yeah.
It's amazing. And with Allegre Chamber Orchestra, you have been their musical director. You founded them.
I did.
And they are an all-female orchestra.
That's correct.
Based sort of in Vancouver, but could be anywhere, right? This is a.
That's true. Well, we're working on a Calgary chapter that was just kind of getting up and running, and then COVID. So we'll have to pick up.
I was laughing before you got here because I think my last actual work trip before COVID was to Calgary for some meetings.
That's
with Canada
right.
Council, and we had coffee.
That's right.
And literally, you were, I think, my last official meeting prior to
oh
all
boy.
of this. Yeah. So what happened?
Auspicious.
What did we talk about? I don't even remember. So yeah, it's cool to have to be able to celebrate an all women's orchestral group, because for centuries women were kept out of playing in orchestras.
Exactly.
I mean, not all that long ago, frankly. I mean, the Vienna Phil only allowed women, I think,
what was it, 20 years ago or something?
If that?
Yeah.
I was thinking 17, 18. Like, I feel like I was already an adult, which is terrifying to think about, like, that was still a thing. And now,
Yes.
I believe, is it now by next year they anticipate it'll be 50% women?
Something like that. Yeah, it's approaching parity for sure. I mean, that's an entire.
French orchestras are still very far from parity.
Yes.
French orchestras are still very, very sadly. Women make up less than 15% of French orchestras.
Yeah.
Which is very confusing for those of us. I remember my first conference where they were talking. I was in a conference in Europe, and they were talking about gender equity in the orchestra, and all of the Canadians and the Americans were sitting there going, because women make up 50% of orchestra players in Canada and the US, and so, but in many countries they don't.
Right. Well, and I think perhaps one of the reasons for that is the screened auditions. That's not always taking place, across the pond. Whereas, for better or for worse, North American orchestras are unionized, and that was one of the things that came in with unionized orchestras was to have the screened auditions where, if folks aren't familiar with the process, the musicians perform all of the rounds, however many those might be, except for perhaps the final or final 2 rounds behind a screen, and they're not allowed to make any sounds or any indication, anything that would give away their identity. And once we started having that imposed on the industry, it only took a few years.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost like there was bias. And interestingly enough, in the countries now that don't have gender parity, they don't have screened auditions.
Yes.
And the ones that do, they have gender parity. And so it's a fairly fascinating dialogue internationally. But I love the fact that you put the plan together, the plan in motion to have this all women's orchestra.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the time when we founded, I mean, it's kind of a funny story. I'll touch on it briefly. It kind of came about as a fluke, actually. I wanted to put together a series of fundraising concerts for Music Heals, which is an amazing charitable organization that goes about helping organizations found music therapy programs, in schools, in senior centers, military military bases, and help them out with funding and connecting them with a music therapist, which will create a program designed just for them. And my friend was the founder of this amazing program, and I was so inspired by what he was doing, and I wanted to help and contribute in some way. And so I put out a call to my colleagues, saying, hey, it's the end of the season. Let's just get together, play some music, and give the money to charity. And coincidentally, only female musicians responded. And so, the interest was much more than I thought. Originally, it's funny, we're performing Piazzolla this week because that was my intention when I saw I had an all-female orchestra. I was like, oh, we'll have fun. We'll play some Piazzolla. We'll serve chocolate. Maybe we'll perform in a shoe store. I still want to do that, by the way. And, just have a great time. And then I realized, I was like, oh, I only need one more trumpet player and a timpani, and we could do a symphony. Right. And so we did it. It kind of took off from there. And in the weeks leading up, there was just this tremendous buzz about it being an all-female orchestra. I realized we needed a name, that this was, with our first rehearsal, it was clear that it was something that was really needed. It was the height of the Me Too movement, 2016. Also, there were some very toxic things going on in the orchestral culture in Vancouver, specifically around gender and harassment and workplace issues. And so I didn't realize it, but we really needed a safe place to land and just create and just be artists and not have to worry about orchestral politics and all that other things that were swirling around. And it became a very powerful thing almost overnight. We attracted a lot of attention, both good and bad. And I will say now that that's how you know you're onto something. And so we realized that this was something that really needed to move forward. And we felt very empowered that we could use our skills and come together to create, not only a difference in the musical world, but in our communities in general. And to this point, I think we've premiered or commissioned 12 works. That's no small undertaking, but it's always so incredibly rewarding, and to be able to partner with female minority musicians, and that really stretches us and really pushes us, and draws awareness. Just the fact that we're an all-female orchestra makes a statement, I think, about these historical and complex gender issues that we have to look very, very closely at in the classical music world, if we're ever going to fully address it. And if our stages are going to, actually look like our communities and sound like our communities. And I think that that's also a key thing to keeping classical music relevant. It's like, why would you seek out some obscure art form that, originated in Europe if you're not European, of European descent, if there's no one that looks like you on the stage? We're kind of in our crystallized palaces or centennial auditoriums, all kind of isolated from the rest of the real world, unless we really make a concerted effort.
Exactly, and not only just a concerted effort, but to allow all the voices to have a place at the table. I mean, if we're going to be, what's wonderful about music is it is universal, which means that the people often who made classical music for generations purposefully kept it non-universal.
Exactly.
And I think that's what's really exciting about being able to be an orchestra in this day and age. We've done a lot of work to try and look at how we can be the change we want to see, and that's been really phenomenal, both for the musicians, for the staff involved, for the audience. And so actually this weekend, this is a good place to jump into Postcards from Buenos Aires. We have a piece of music that I believe this is the North American premiere.
It is, yes.
And the composer can't watch live because she's performing a concert in Buenos Aires at the exact same time.
Typical working musician.
I know, right? Yeah, like, I'll see it later, I've got a gig. That's exactly.
At least she's got a gig.
Exactly.
We applaud that.
Exactly. So Urban Mysteries this is a fascinating piece. Tell us more about Mañas and how you found her music.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started talking about this program, it was a bit of a puzzle to program, honestly. And we talked about how absolutely we wanted to make sure there was a female featured on this program, as I felt strongly too. But I was really struggling to find a suitable match for this program. I even called my friend who works at a publisher that specializes in South American composers. I was like, what do you have for me? Like, just open the vaults, please. And he said, I hardly have anything by female South American composers, and even less by that is written for orchestra.
Exactly. There's some for vocal music,
Yep.
but very little for orchestra, even very little for like solo, like violin, piano. So this is not a European problem.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's so that I was really stumped for weeks and weeks, and I had a great conversation with actually one of our Allegro members in Calgary, and she introduced me to the works of Adriana Figueroa Manas, and so I was really fascinated with her sound. She kind of pays tribute to Piazzolla in her sound and in her approach and compositional devices and language. So I thought that would be a really interesting thing to throw in. It's not an orchestral work. It is for chamber orchestra, so you'll get to experience the SSO in as a more intimate sense, and it'll feature some of the principal players, which is always a great opportunity as well. But she when I asked her about, we've had lovely email
She's
exchanges.
lovely.
she's
absolutely
one of the most wonderful
wonderful,
lady.
yeah.
And I asked her about this piece. I was like, what can you tell me about it? She was like, oh, this was about myself and my friends exploring a brand new city at night. And I thought that's
And it
delightful.
does. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's I hope people will enjoy it. There's a lot of really interesting elements of it. It's very it's very approachable but complex at the same time. The string players and the flute and clarinet are asked to do some extended techniques, and so that's an interesting color to watch out for and kind of zero in on. And
extended techniques are things that they would never normally do.
exactly.
And probably if players who would have finished their studies before 2000 may never have learned them in school, would have to have learned them. And depending on composer to composer, you can get different extended techniques, which is I always find fascinating. It's like a whole new adventure every time.
Yes, absolutely, and it's very progressive of her to. She is a flautist herself, so I was really looking closely at the flute writing, and she gives all kinds of very, very detailed notes to the flute player. Even just how to move the head joint, so just ever so slightly, and how to breathe so it sounds more like a panpipe, and just really interesting like little things that you can see it comes from her own relationship with that instrument, and she knows exactly what she wants.
And that you'd never learn from another piece of music. Because
Exactly.
she's actually giving you that information. Yeah, she's been lovely to talk to. She's so enthusiastic and excited about having
She
us
was just
play this
thrilled.
piece. Yeah,
I think I received a response to my initial email to her in like 5 minutes.
yeah, that's
and
wonderful.
it's such a thrill to be able to work with a living composer, and to be able to discuss and you don't have to guess. You can actually have a discussion. Usually, we're interpreting from our own place of and our own background and training when we're kind of imposing ourselves on these works that were written hundreds of years ago, or even like 50 years ago in the case of what we're playing with the Piazzolla and Ginastera. So yeah, it's just such a wonderful thrill, and one of the most rewarding things about my career is being able to work with composers that are alive and see their enthusiasm for what they're creating and what they truly want to say and convey to the world through their compositional language.
Speaking of composers who know what they want to say to the world, Astor Piazzolla is one of the most significant figures of 20th century music. I don't know that he would have considered himself such, but he is. He gave us the tango. Born to Italian parents in Argentina. I think they lived in Little Italy in New York when he was young,
Yes.
and then moved back. And by the age of 11 or something, he was already writing tangos.
He was a child prodigy.
Yeah, and by age 15, he was already touring with local tango orchestras.
Yes.
And at 17, he moved away from home to
Yeah.
pursue his career. And I
to
just
do his thing.
it fascinates me. He was such a bold character, and there are sort of periods to his compositional life, because there's the younger works, and then you get into the mature, particularly after he worked with Nadia Boulanger
Yes.
in France he was early 30s, had left home, kids at home, and he was like, no, I'm going to study with Nadia at the behest of Ginastera.
Yeah.
So that's nice. And and Boulanger was the one who said, no, go write tangos.
Absolutely. So he, at the time, he'd been studying with Ginastera, which was that was a really fun thing to be able to pair up, student and teacher on this program. But so he learned a tremendous amount from Ginastera, and he'd actually given up playing bandoneon during that time because he said, no, I want to focus on. I'm a serious classical composer, and so he hadn't played bandoneon in ages professionally, and he at the time when he went to work with Boulanger, she heard him play for a few minutes, and she said, well, this is very well written, but it's not Piazzolla. Who are you? What are you? What's going on here? And that was incredibly insightful of her. And he said, well, she said, what's your instrument? It's obviously not piano, so he must not have been a very good pianist. So she was the one that insisted that he go back to playing bandoneon and performing. And I was thinking about this the other day. The only reason we probably know about tango in North America is because of Piazzolla. Yeah. He underwent a tremendous amount of abuse and criticism for the kind of this avant-garde take on what was considered avant-garde.
His tangos, even to the Argentinians, were avant-garde. The Nuevo Tango was. He talks about the fact that tango is for the ears, not the feet.
Yes.
And so that would have been kind of directly in opposition to the life he was, inside in Argentina.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were stories about him, being beaten in the streets and his family being threatened, things we can't even imagine that some composers have to go through to create what they truly are.
Yeah, he was challenging what they thought they loved.
Yes.
And it is fascinating now that a few generations later, his music is by far the most influential of any Argentinian composer.
Absolutely.
So it's very fascinating, the reaction to his sound.
Yes. Well, and because prior to Piazzolla, kind of stepping into this world, the tangos would have been quite simple. They would have been, probably passed down generation to generation by ear, and written by, amateur musicians and composers, or so they were beautiful and a reflection of the culture, but they weren't that sophisticated. So he really elevated. He really elevated the tango in that, he incorporated classical music aspects of it, like a fugue, the ground bass, and combined that with improv over top, which is very definitely taken from jazz. And I read today that he would sneak into the clubs in New York when he was underage to listen to, Benny Goodman and Duke Ellington. And so you can very much hear that jazz influence in a way. And then also, Baroque, almost Baroque-like ornamentation.
Because he learned a lot of Bach on the bandoneon. His teacher in New York was like a student of Rachmaninoff.
Exactly.
So he had that. You can hear flavor of Stravinsky and Ravel, and that the music of that time he brought that into the tango and arguably brought the tango into it. So it was such a melding of sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. To create an entirely new genre, which we now refer to as Nuevo Tango. And, the other thing that I find fascinating about him is that he wasn't afraid to take his works. A lot of composers are quite precious about what they've written, and rightfully so. They've crafted it and loved it to life. But he was always very like open-minded about the treatment of his music. And he himself, like I saw a performance of him the other day, like playing doing a bandoneon solo with like all electric guitars backing him up. Like that was just how he was.
Yeah, he music to him was flexible.
Yes.
It could be, and so it wasn't there wasn't the sacred cow about it.
Yes.
It was music, and it was meant to be enjoyed. And like it's so easy to enjoy Piazzolla. Like even some of his more, some of the concertos for bandoneon are different to our ears. Even in the Five Tango Sensations in L'Histoire de Tango, you get these moments that are like, well, this is a bit strange, but it's so instantly enjoyable.
Yeah.
He has the ability to make I sort of hate the word accessible because I don't even know what that means. When people say classical music, this is accessible. Is it on Apple Music? I don't know what that means exactly. But he had this way of making it easy to love. It didn't alienate the listener.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the real gifts that he had.
Absolutely.
And because he didn't make a sacred cow, you could do it however you wanted. You could take his pieces and turn them upside down. He kind of allowed us all into that world.
Yes, absolutely. And I think for me personally, when I encounter Piazzolla's music, I find it so profoundly human. It's about the human experience. Of course, we always talk about and we associate the sensual aspect of the tango and the intimate nature of that. But with these Five Tango Sensations that we're doing with our wonderful soloist Jonathan Goldman, it's a different kind of humanity that's portrayed in those. It's we begin with spoiler alert. We begin the concert with Asleep. And there are periods of definitely like a deep rest, but then it's also almost like a bad dream in places and unsettled. And then the next movement is Loving, which has this constant heartbeat all the way through.
But it's not overly romantic.
No. Yeah.
I find that so fascinating because he is a composer who wears his heart on his sleeve. You know what he's feeling in the moment. And then he has this beautiful piece called Love, and it's not extroverted. No. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And not over romanticized at all.
Particularly because he played it. I mean,
yes.
for a very long time, he was the person who played this piece.
Yes, absolutely. It was almost like it's his personal take on it almost. I find this little set of 5 tangos to be some of like his most fascinating works for me personally, because they kind of show a whole different side of his language and his composition and kind of how he. It seems like almost like reading his diary in a way.
It's very intimate.
Yeah,
it's very personal and very intimate, and you feel like you're getting the story from the source.
Yeah.
Even in like it's so thrilling to have Jonathan Goldman here. Some of our audience will remember a few years ago, I think in 2014, Cortango was here to perform with the orchestra. Jonathan is the bandoneon player with them, and so it's a thrill to have him back. I'm also apologizing to him this week for the cold.
We'll give them some Tim
It'll
Hortons.
be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. But they're intensely personal, and like Anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The middle piece is it's not you think of people writing Anxiety, you think of people like Prokofiev and Ravel, who knew how to weave that into their music, that sense sense of internal tension. This Anxiety is more extroverted than Love.
Yeah. Absolutely.
which you know is a fascinating thought.
Yeah, it's very raw. It's very prickly. It's very present. You know, it's inescapable. It's annoying and irritating. And in places, in fact, last night at rehearsal, I was asking them to stop playing with such a nice sound. Yeah. And then the movement that follows that, it's like we just spiral downwards from there. There's anxiety, and then there's despertar, and then the final movement, which is fear. And fear is kind of I find it almost like kind of an oxymoron with that whole movement, because it's actually probably the most cheerful of all.
It is, and it's sexier than love, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
That these 5 pieces, which have such different sounds, can still have that root of the tango sensation to them, that sense of movement and flow and personal. And I guess that is what tango is.
Right, and through all of those, you know, moving through all of those very human experiences and emotion. Yeah.
And we get to do a couple of his other works as well, which is great. Oblivion is the one that everybody knows. It is probably
greatest.
his biggest hit.
Yeah, his top 40.
I would think. Yeah. So really thrilling. What is it? You and Jonathan haven't worked together before.
Not yet.
So what? Have you ever worked with a bandoneon player? I asked that. I was like, she's gonna say no. Nobody's worked with a bandoneon.
I've worked with a bayan player.
Well,
so the Russian version of the, and that's also a very fascinating instrument to me. It sounds like a mini pipe organ, but no, bandoneon is new to me. But
so what I find fascinating about bandoneon players, particularly Jonathan's playing. I mean, it's not, being a pianist, growing up a pianist, you learn everything it fits into place. Everything fits. Those bandoneon players, it's very live and in the moment and virtuosic and improvisational, and some of it's written down and some of it's not. And Jonathan, when we first met with him, I remember him saying that, like, I play what's there, but I also play other stuff. And it's like, I find that fascinating from a classically trained standpoint. It's like,
it's terrifying.
Yeah. How? So how do you mentally, I guess you just go with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because exactly when I'm preparing for this, there are those things that really ground the composition, regardless of what he chooses to add. And some things are like the ground bass. That kind of recurring structure, like in the low strings, or Piazzolla is really good with his structure. Like, it's a very traditional structure. It's often like fast, slow, fast, or some combination fast, slow, fast, and then a coda or something like that. So you really, when you have no idea what the soloist is going to do, you have to kind of lock into those unwavering pillars, and but also encourage. We're talking a lot last night as we were going through these with the strings, to have your ears wide open, and, because we're all hearing things at the same time. It's all of our job to, collaborate and play chamber music, and be flexible and move, and be ready to move, and that's true music making. To me, is when the ensemble is engaged in that way, and we're all really listening and committed to creating together, and that's when it's kind of a freeing and exhilarating experience to have that connection with a group of people, and you feel like anything is truly possible.
Yeah. I think pairing the tangos of Piazzolla alongside the dances of Estancia by Alberto Ginastera is such a great. He was his teacher. He was Piazzolla's teacher, probably where he learned about Ravel and Stravinsky.
Exactly.
That sound. And prior to Piazzolla, Ginastera was the biggest figure in Argentinian musical history.
Yeah.
And still is. I mean, he's one of the great figures of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Very different dances. And yet, what I find fascinating about both, we're doing a reduction, but even in the large scale, this music actually does require the mentality of chamber music.
Absolutely.
Which I find fascinating, because that's true of both of these composers. Is that fluke? Is that because one learned from the other. I don't know. It's maybe we won't know because they're dead now. But but the dances of Estancia are some of the most extroverted explosions of color that he ever put down on the page.
Absolutely. I mean, it's derived from the ballet Estancia, which means the ranch. And it tells the story of, in one act, of a boy that falls madly in love with a city boy who falls madly in love with the ranch girl. And, he's desperately trying to woo her. And
Could be Saskatchewan, folks. It
Yeah,
could
right?
Be, yeah.
Could easily do
University of Saskatchewan egg parties all over again. Anyway.
Yeah, we could do a Saskatchewan take on this.
Yeah.
He feels like, or she feels like he's not nearly, tough enough or, up to snuff. And so, long story short, he beats the Gaucho Cowboys at their own game in the concluding Malambo, which is a traditional contest dance. And so that concludes the ballet and is the concluding movement of this 4-movement suite that was derived from the music of Estancia. And it's just in true form. Of course, the ballet never really took off,
No,
but
the dances
the
did.
dances were good.
Yeah.
So it's like a movie. It's like, well, the soundtrack is good.
Exactly. Yeah. Welcome to being a composer for a while there. This actually came from something else. Yeah, we don't hear
Okay,
that.
we don't even know.
And I love what you've done with it because you've broken them up. So we don't hear one piece and then the other piece. We actually travel, and it is a bit of a travel because it's the back and forth between the intimacy of the piazzolla and the personalness of it all, and then the extroverted not personalness of the Ginastera and the dances. I mean, we go from tango to all sorts of other dances, and I think it's a fascinating way to explore the sounds of Argentina. Have you been to Argentina?
Unfortunately, no.
I haven't either. So I have a friend who spends quite a bit of
Road
time
trip.
There you
Yeah.
go. Well, maybe not this year,
Yeah.
but when international travel's allowed again, I'm with you. I have a friend who spends a great deal of time there and talks about, it's the culture is so present and they're so proud of their culture and so you can't really avoid it in wandering about the streets. And I think I'm always fascinated when you go to places like that, like Italy is very similar and when you go and I kind of envy them because in Canada and even North America, if you will, you can go into a big city and not really know where you are.
Yes, absolutely.
There isn't a sense of collective culture.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's a New World thing. I don't know, but Argentina, particularly Buenos Aires, it's one of the busiest cities in the world.
Yes.
We have footage in the show this weekend that shows some of the cars at night, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's so many people, and it is such a culturally vibrant city. I mean, Teatro Colón is one of the greatest opera houses in the world. That we don't think of as much because we have been conditioned to think of classical music as being European, but South America has had such a vibrant classical music scene since the Baroque era.
Yeah, absolutely, and and such a distinct musical flavor and kind of nationalistic inflections, especially in the Ginastera that we hear. That folkloric kind of sound of the past, but it's also very current.
Yeah.
That's something that is really fascinating to me in the music of Ginastera, because there was these dances come from early on in his career, when later on he moved to more serialism and chants music and
Scarier music.
Yeah. But this to me is authentic.
Yeah.
Ginastera, that was his voice, and
less academic.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
very musical. It's very artistic. It's less, I've learned how to do this and now I'm writing it this way.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like the OG Ginastera works better than his more recent.
And none of us know how to pronounce his name.
I know it's
Because so actually I had a friend text, which is it? Hilariously, like for the first half of his life he went by Ginastera, and then later in his life he went by Ginastera.
Ginastera.
And so it's like, well, pick. But none of us know. So I figured when you said Ginastera, I was like, well, I'll just go with the other one. We'll just
you
balance
a little bit
it
of
out.
everything.
Yeah, his father was from Catalan, and so the Catalonians would have said Ginastera, and so later in life he went with that. It's fascinating. He's a fascinating composer who also, I mean, himself, he didn't spend his entire life in Brazil or in Argentina. He was in New York. He was in Paris. He was a big figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read somewhere that during his years in New York, like he worked for a time in a synagogue, and so some of that Jewish influence rubbed off on him, and
Because his mother was Jewish, wasn't she?
I think so. Yeah, I think that was the connection there, and then. Well, also, actually, this commission for Estancia for the ballet was actually commissioned in New York by the American Ballet Company. So he got some good gigs while he was
He was a big deal.
Yeah,
It was a very big deal. It's great to feature these three. I mean, Piazzolla has sort of gained a lot of popularity in the last few years. We've been able to bring his music to life here twice in my time at the SSO with the Four Seasons of Buenos Aires.
Yes, fantastic.
Which if you're a subscriber to our digital concert stream, you can actually see that concert. It's available to you through your subscription with Veronique Mathieu, and it's his music is just so instantly lovable. Ginastera's music we don't get to perform as often, and Adriana Figueroa Manas that's brand new to all of us. So I'm really thrilled that this piece gets a new life.
And I hope, I hope this kind of sparks some curiosity, in the works of Manas, because she's got quite an impressive,
a lot of music.
A lot of music, yeah. And also, I mean, there's so much more to explore with Ginastera and Piazzolla. I mean, we're kind of focusing on Piazzolla in this concert because it's his 100th birthday.
It is.
So
it is. On March 11th, I think, or something. It's coming up
it's
soon.
coming up.
Yeah.
Pisces. He was a Pisces.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go.
So it's wonderful to be able to celebrate these works, and kind of I see this concert as kind of looking forward with the works of Manas, but also with a nod to the past. Yeah.
One of the questions that came in is about the accordion. So we don't actually the bandoneon is not exactly an accordion, but it's not an accordion. Right?
There you go.
I think that's the scientific definition of a bandoneon. It is a traditionally South American and button, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and so different than the keyboards that we see in sort of the more Germanic cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to watching Jonathan kind of up close and personal in the camera. We can get one of the cameras quite close to John, and so it'll be really cool to be able to watch his hands. Because we're all sort of used to the keyboard idea, particularly if you're a pianist, it sort of makes sense. Whereas with the buttons, it's that's got to be way harder.
Yeah, and if folks haven't had the chance to actually go online and watch Piazzolla himself playing the bandoneon, that's really a treat.
He was he was the true virtuoso at it.
Absolutely, yeah. And he could make it do anything.
And was from a young age. He was like 14 when Carlos Gardel wanted him to come out on tour,
yeah.
And his father said no, which was good because the plane, all 35 musicians died in a plane crash.
Yeah.
So I think later in life he used to joke about if he'd gone on tour, he'd have been playing the harp instead of the bandoneon.
Amazing.
Yeah. So he did have a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
He was also such a figure. Like he commanded attention when he played. He kind of lived his own myths.
Yeah, absolutely, and just the intensity in which he lived and played, it's always something that grabs me and that I feel like comes through the page. When he recorded these five tango sensations that we're performing with the Kronos Quartet, the original recording. The first violinist of the Kronos said they got it done in 2 hours. He said that was the fastest recording session because he was just so focused and so driven, and that rubbed off on them and like brought the music out of them and just united them, and they just got
Supposedly
it done.
he didn't like to work on things too much.
Yeah.
He wanted to get it right
Yeah.
and then move on.
First time's the charm.
How can we all learn that? Like how classical musicians around the world need to learn from this man.
It's very true.
We're getting to do Adriana's music this weekend. What other composers should some of our audience look up? I mean, we've been this year we've gotten to play a number of great voices that have been frankly silenced for too long. We did some of the music of Chevalier de Saint Georges. We did. Martinez in November, which was just incredible.
Oh yeah,
both that one for sure was the Canadian premiere.
amazing.
Yeah, it's what other diverse voices should people go out and find, because there are so many.
Yeah. Well, if we're looking back historically, I love Elizabeth Jaquette de la Guiera. That's fascinating, and she worked in the court of Louis XIV in a time when women were not even musicians. No. I love Gabriella Lena Frank. She's a fascinating, wonderful composer, and does a tremendous amount of work through her academy, supporting musicians of all cultures and genders. And many of my composer associates have benefited from her mentorship. We also have some tremendous Canadian voices, of course. There's Barbara Crowell, who's a wonderful Indigenous voice. We have a Dorothy Chang, which is a very, very interesting and thoughtful perspective on the Canadian Chinese experience. And we recently recorded one of her works, and it's a fantastic. Kind of spanning of both of those worlds and incorporating both of those languages very skillfully. Of course, there's Alexena Louis, and she also writes things that are very accessible for students, as well as her major concert works.
Particularly for the piano.
Beautiful piano.
Absolutely incredible piano music. And I think the earliest piece is usually around grade 6 or grade 7 piano in RCM. And when I used to teach, that was one of the pieces kids took to instantly. I years and years and years ago, she had this set called Music for Piano, and I got to perform at a thing that was celebrating Alexena Louis, and she was there, and so I got to play one of the pieces from the set. There was 4 pianists. So we each got to play one of the pieces, and afterwards she came up to me and she's like, "That was brilliant. It's not what I wrote, but it was brilliant." And I went, "Pardon?" And she's like, "Let me see your score." My score had an error in it. The key signature was wrong.
Oh my gosh. That's not even.
And so then she years later she got in touch with me. She's like, "Actually," she's like, "it was wrong in all the editions that went out." So,
but it still worked.
It still worked, because that's how
it's a brilliant key.
Yeah, exactly. We've had a question come in. Have you composed anything? Do you do a lot of arranging?
I do. Yeah, I do a lot of arranging,
particularly for this concert.
and reducing.
As recently, we had to reduce this concert even farther than we had originally reduced it to make sure we could accommodate all of the social distancing guidelines right now.
Yeah.
Do you do any composing?
Not as of yet. I loved, as a violinist, delving into the jazz and improv world. Which is, composing on the spot, but then it's gone forever. So that doesn't count. But I feel like that's more and more that's something that I will explore in the years to come. There's things inside me that I want to express, and I'll have to, find ways to do that. But as of now, I'm too busy, quite frankly.
That's good. Next time you're in quarantine, you can just spread
that's
something
right.
out. That's good. Yeah.
Quarantine plan.
Yeah, exactly. One of the questions that has come in is about the how many views the SSO has had this season, and this is a fascinating thing. I haven't actually looked since about December, about after January 1st. I haven't looked at the stats. So by that time, we had over 30,000 people watch our concerts, whether in live stream or after the fact on demand through the digital concert stream, and that's pretty fascinating. We figured that out based on how many household views. The Canada Council for the Arts has kind of given us all a guideline for how to figure out, because some people will watch on their own, some people watch in a room of 6 people in a family. So we all sort of assume, based on these guidelines, you can figure it out. So we're about 30,000, which which
That's
was
brilliant.
it's crazy. And what I find even crazier is the fact that it's we're thrilled to see all of our subscribers, all of our fan base here in Saskatoon, across the province. You know, I have a friend who lives in Maple Creek, and she came in. You know, she came in once for Messiah because she loves it, and she came in for another concert, but couldn't come regularly because that's a trek.
Yeah.
You know, 4 or 5 hours, and now she watches every single SSO concert live. We have people up north in La Ronge who've written and said, you know, we're watching every concert. But we have people in every province, lots of states, and in so many countries around the globe. It's absolutely fascinating. Some of them are you know, expats from Saskatoon who have gone to warmer pastures.
Once a Saskatoonian, always a Saskatoonian.
Yeah, once a Saskatoon. Well, because you bought the jacket and you had to keep the parka. Yeah. But we have a lot of people who found us online through searching for online classical music. I think actually one of the silver linings in for classical music from the pandemic, and I think there have been a few, but one of the silver linings is this embracing of digital, which we in the industry have sort of been itching for a few years, but the pandemic forced us all into it.
Yes, it kind of propelled us forward.
So it's
really
like, stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Because we'd been talking about it inside the organization for years about, well, how do we do this? What do we do next? And we'd filmed a couple of concerts and that had been really successful. But to just make that leap to digital we needed the push. And, you know, even for one of the other things that has been a total side effect is, you know, seniors' homes are able to watch. You know, we usually do a seniors tour twice a year to get the musicians out and performing in seniors' homes. But now seniors' homes all across the province have been able to watch. The Christmas shows were made available for free to schools and seniors. Yeah. And so, you know, thousands of school kids, thousands of seniors. And this, in the next couple of weeks, we're releasing our digital school show, Little Ludwig, about Beethoven's 250th birthday, which we performed prior to the pandemic in schools, and now is a filmed experience. And we're looking, the next filmed experience for kids this fall is going to be a retelling of Peter and the Wolf through the eyes of an Indigenous boy in Saskatchewan.
Oh, beautiful!
And so it's a new medium. It's strange because, you know, in rehearsals this week at some point I get to sit with our incredible videographer Simeon, and I get to call the camera angles when we go, and at some point in rehearsal one of us will yell out, "We need something moved," so that a camera, like, all of a sudden, you know, it doesn't matter where we normally have a chair, we have to move it for the camera. And everybody just embraced it. Like, all the musicians were like, "Oh yeah, okay," and you know, moving the lights on the stands, or lowering the stands so we can see them better. It's been such an exciting time to be involved in our industry because embracing this has been really unique, and to see the audience embrace it and be able to use it as a different form of what we do, in terms of just, you know, doing a concert and waiting for people to show up.
Yeah.
Now we're going to them, and that feels really cool.
Yeah, and who knew that this would actually expand your audience reach?
Who knew?
Yeah.
It's been pretty fascinating to see, you know, viewers. We now have fans. We have a little group of fans in England who stay up to watch our concerts. My sister lives in England. She does not stay up to watch our concerts because it's like 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And yet we have these, like, it's fascinating. It's a whole new era that we get to continue this weekend with our little trip to Buenos Aires. So that'll be a lot of fun. In February, we're back here in a month's time. With Eric. He's back home for this next concert, our next Masters concert. But throughout the month of February, we're going to be exploring the music of Italy. We decided it deserved 2 concerts all of its own.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's just so much music, frankly. There's just such a dearth of it.
How can you choose?
Yeah, literally. So La Dolce Vita is on the Valentine's weekend on February 13th, and then the Carnival of Venice, full of Baroque music from the Venice Carnival years, when you know, Don Juan DeMarco and all those.
Good times.
I know. Well, you know, it was fascinating at least, and the music was
fantastic.
Weird and fantastical. So yeah. So Thank you so much for joining us here tonight, Janna. Thank you so much for being here. I apologize for the cold.
It's okay.
Yeah, it wasn't my
I'm
doing,
bundled.
but yeah, good. It's good. Thanks so much. You can join us this weekend with Postcards from Buenos Aires, 7:30 on Saturday. It airs, it streams for 24 hours. Thanks so much. Have a great night, Saskatoon. Thank you. That was awesome.
That was really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun.
I could just